Statistics South Africa released the latest GDP growth figures this morning for this quarter of 2023. Gross domestic product measures the market value of all goods and services a country produces in a specific time frame. In the first quarter, South Africa's economy expanded by 0.4%. Manufacturing, transport and construction drove this minimal growth. If we look at last year, it is a bit of a mixed bag. In the first quarter of the economy expanded by 1.9%, going back to pre-pandemic levels. Let's go to Melissa Tichy now. In fact, she is our business anchor, for her to just break it down a little further for us. Melissa, of course, this is good news, at least, even though it's very little, but it's good news for now.
Yes, Masego, it is good news, but it still shows the impact of the load shedding we are facing. Let's have a quick look again at those gross domestic product numbers. So in January to March, we grew by 0.4%, which looks very good, but still that impact of load shedding. Manufacturing, transport and construction drove this minimal growth. Then if we look at last year, you were just explaining that now, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Like you said, in the first quarter, the economy expanded by 1.5%, going back to pre-pandemic levels. Then in the second quarter, we saw a dip again of minus 0.8, and that was due to the devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal as well as load shedding. If we then look at Q3, we saw that growth there, and that was driven by agriculture, finance, transport and the manufacturing industries. And then in the fourth quarter, we declined by 1.1% there, and that was dragged lower mainly by finance, trade, mining, agriculture, manufacturing and general government services, and obviously power cuts. Let's unpack the latest GDP numbers now with the chief economist at the Bureau for Economic Research, Hugo Pienaar. Hugo, thank you for joining us. One would have thought that the severity of power cuts earlier this year would have taken South Africa into a recession, but the economy actually grew it, albeit fractionally. Why is that?
Good afternoon, Melissa. I must say, we've been making the argument for quite some time that despite the intensification of load shedding in the first quarter, because of specific factors that drove GDP negative in the fourth quarter of last year, you should see a bit of a recovery this year. So there are two important factors. The one is on the production side of GDP, the finance sector, which is the biggest sector in the economy, that saw an outsized decline in the fourth quarter. It was sort of a bit of a strange number, and one always thought that would recover in the first quarter, or at least not show nearly as bad a number as in the fourth quarter. And indeed, that is what transpired. And then on the demand side, if you look at GDP from the demand side, besides load shedding in the fourth quarter last year, we saw a big dip in exports. And that was, of course, as a result of a prolonged strike at Transnet. And we also had a coal derailment in November. So there we also thought that exports should look better in the first quarter, and indeed that thankfully transpired. So I think the long and the short is, besides load shedding, there were very specific constraints in the fourth quarter, and those normalized in Q1, which then helps to explain why we got this modest positive growth number.
Hugo, we saw agriculture taking a huge dive. Is this just a technical occurrence, or has agricultural activity actually slowed down on the ground?
Look, agriculture tends to be very volatile from one quarter to the next. So especially if you look at the quarter-on-quarter movements, there tends to be quite large swings. We know that in parts of the country, especially January going into February, we saw flooding once again. So some of the vegetable production came under strain. So it may be flood related. So hopefully we'll see the second quarter looking a bit better on the agricultural side.
Is there any evidence in these numbers that point to the fact that the country's power and infrastructure challenges are curbing economic growth?
So again, as mentioned, I think in the first quarter, our exports actually bounced back from some of these constraints in the fourth quarter. But now we must bear in mind, as we move into the second quarter, we are already again seeing these logistical constraints come to the fore. There have been reports about the container corridor between Durban and Johannesburg being under pressure the last couple of weeks. And then last week, the iron ore line between Sishen and Saldanha had a cable theft incident where there was the line had to be closed for a day or so. And then unfortunately yesterday we had a derailment on that coal line. So I think certainly the logistic constraints unfortunately continue. And then we know that that load shedding was just as intense, if not more intense, in the second quarter. Of course, the second quarter is not done yet. We need to see how June pans out, but it's shaping up to be as intense as it was in the first quarter. So certainly both of those factors, I think, is a significant deterrent on growth at this stage.
Hugo, the question is whether this economy can grow at a rate that will create jobs. How far are we from that? What is our outlook for the rest of 2023?
Look, I think unfortunately 2023 is going to be a bit of a write-off in terms of growth. So yes, we had some modest momentum in the first quarter of the year. But if we look at the full year, the general expectation is still that you're going to have very little, if any, growth. And in that environment, that is certainly not a conducive environment for employment. We do think in certain subsectors of the economy, there is still scope for jobs to recover. Tourism, for example, perhaps the broader hospitality sector. But in a general sense, no, I don't think there's going to be much employment growth this year.
Thank you for your time, Hugo. That was Chief Economist at the Bureau for Economic Research, Hugo Pienaar. Back to you.